Yeah, you ready?
I am ready, please.
Okay, so I'm admitting everyone in now, so everyone's gonna be able to see you.
Okay.
And I'm gonna tell you when to start. I'm gonna put it live on Facebook now, and I'll tell you when to start.
1 second, please wait 1 second because I don't know what just happened here. Aaron took me off. How do I get back onto this? Onto my thing. Leave that. Don't worry about that. How do I get back onto my class? Back onto my notes. Now I can't do this when I do this. That goes on. I need to get back.
Don't worry, I got you. I'm fine.
Waiting.
Yeah, that's fine. First of all, your mic off.
You ready? Hello?
Hello?
You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, I'm going live.
Good evening. A number of you may be familiar with the practice of dedicating a class to someone who requires a blessing for a refuah shalema, a complete recovery. As the topic of tonight's class is connected to coronavirus, I'd like to dedicate it to all who have been impacted by this challenging state of affairs. May our collective Torah study bring health, safety, and a complete recovery in every way, physically, emotionally, and economically, to all who need. At the onset of this recent pandemic, the World Health Organization issued guidelines to help protect against the coronavirus. Among the primary ones, wash your hands well and frequently, followed closely by directives on how to safely interact. Unsurprisingly, as with everything else, we can find connections, meanings, origins, and lessons in the Torah, even with regard to hand washing and isolation and healthy integration. What's a spiritual source, the tie-in, and ultimately lesson? In the next 15 to 20 minutes, we will explore insights on this topic with its relevance to our daily life. As Jews, we know all about washing hands, from immediately upon awakening to before eating bread, following the use of the restroom, during services before the Kohanim bless the community. We are almost obsessive about washing hands. Who instituted this mitzvah? Where did it originate? The Talmud tells us in Masechta Eruvin, Shetikein Shlomo Eruvin u'Natilas Yadayim, that it was King Solomon who instituted two laws, Natilat Yadayim, washing of the hands, and Eruvin, the laws of carrying on Shabbat in a shared space. What's washing the hands? In Shemos, in Exodus, God told Moses to require the priests to wash their hands and feet before offering sacrifices or entering the tabernacle. According to the Babylonian Talmud, King Solomon made an additional decree: the priests must wash their hands before handling the terumah, the various offerings. That developed into hand washing before bread that we know today. And what is Eruvin? The second law that the Talmud says was instituted by King Solomon. It's a little complicated, but very briefly, these are the arrangements that allow Jews to carry in a public domain on Shabbat, which would otherwise be forbidden, the Eruv. By placing and partaking of food in a shared space, various unrelated people can now carry in that same area. As in Mishneh Torah, the Jewish laws codified by Maimonides in Eruvin, it says, "V'davazeh takanas Shlomo beis dinai." This regulation was originated by Solomon and his legislative authority. Let's take a moment to briefly discuss Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon. He was the son of King David and Bathsheba. He became king at the young age of 12 and ruled for 40 years. His kingship ushered in an era of prosperity and peace, both internally for the entire Jewish people and with surrounding nations. He oversaw the 7-year construction of the magnificent Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. His wisdom was legendary. The biblical book of Kings, Malachim Aleph, describes how men of all nations would come to consult with him and learn from his wisdom. He was known to understand the language of the animals, for he was the wisest of all men. When he became king, God, Hashem, appeared to him and offered to grant him whatever he wished for. He could have asked for greater wealth, for power or success, but instead asked that he be granted wisdom. God was so pleased by that request that he blessed him with success, power, and wealth in addition to his wisdom. The 40 years of King Solomon's reign are considered the best years in Israel's history, the pinnacle. There was unity within and without. Even his name Shlomo comes from the root word shalom, denoting peace. What was the secret, and how does that connect to his implementing laws of hand washing and making an eruv? And what does that have to do with us? What is interesting is the words which are also addressed in a separate place in the Talmud, in Shabbat. When King Solomon instituted eruvin and the washing of the hands, these two practices in Jewish life, it says, Yotza Baskol, a heavenly echo came forth. Va'amran declared, Beni, my son, imka chacham lebecha, yismach lebi gamani. If your heart is wise, my heart shall be glad than mine. But why? How do these two practices specifically reflect such profound wisdom? Why do these laws specifically make God's heart glad? What's so wise? He was a wise king. We know that from the above. And most of you know the story written in Kings 1 in Malach Aleph about the two mothers. Very briefly, two women lived in the same residence and gave birth a few days apart. Very early on, one of the babies passed away. He was accidentally smothered as he lay next to his mother. That night, the distraught mother slipped into the other mother's room and switched the babies as she slept. Upon awakening and realizing that the baby was not hers and had been replaced, the second mother was understandably hysterical and attempted to reclaim her son. A fight ensued, with each alleging that the boy was hers, and being that it was pre-DNA testing days, no one could prove genealogy. Finally, the case was brought before King Solomon. He heard them out. Then, using his wisdom, he called over a guard and told the mothers that since he was unable to determine the true parent, the fair thing would be to instruct the guard to cut the baby in half and present each mother with half. One mother was agreeable to that, as she determined that if she would potentially not be granted the boy, neither should the other woman. The other mother cried bitterly and begged that the baby remain even with the other mother rather than be killed. King Solomon then handed the baby to its rightful mother, the one who was prepared to forsake ownership of the baby yet save its life, for he had determined that only a true mother would act with such selflessness to save her own child. This story should not be confused with the joke from the shtetl of old. Two women, desperate to find a match for their respective daughters, traveled to a town where there were a number of eligible bachelors. Both of them independently laid eyes on a certain boy and immediately decided that he was the one and proceeded to try and push the match. Obviously, a fight arose as each felt that she had found him first and wanted him to date their daughter. Unable to resolve the conflict, they dragged the poor boy with them to the rabbi. The rabbi heard them out and, recalling the story of Solomon, suggested that they cut the young man in half and each could take half home. One of the women, also remembering the story of Solomon, attempted the same tactic, hoping it would work. She cried out, "No, don't cut him. Let the other mother take him as long as he lives." The other, however, not thinking of any story or with any motive, just responded instinctively and said, "Fine, I'm with the rabbi. Let's cut him in half." The rabbi smiled at his judgment. This young gentleman belongs to the second woman, the one who was agreeable to him being cut in half. Only a true mother-in-law would speak that way. Obviously, this is only a joke, and in no way should be taken as a personal reflection, as I love my daughter-in-law and sons-in-law, and I certainly hope that their view of me is slightly more positive. But back to King Solomon's story. That was true wisdom. However, instituting these two laws of hand washing and Eruv, individuals coming together to share food and enable them to carry on Shabbat, and singling out these laws over any other laws that he may have established, making God's heart glad, requires a deeper understanding. So I saw a beautiful and profound explanation presented by the Kotzker, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Batsk. He was a great Hasidic leader and rabbi in the early 1800s. So he says as follows. He asks, Mahu HaChachma? What is the great wisdom of King Solomon here? So much so that Hashem should say, Yismach Libi, my heart is glad. What's the great wisdom? And he answers, Liyos ma'arev b'davar v'liyos naki, to be immersed with something and at the same time retain cleanliness. That combination and balance, that was the wisdom. Let's look at that for a moment. If you think about the philosophy behind these two mitzvot, they represent two opposite themes, but at the same time, an underlying message and unity. And this is what the Kotzker Rebbe thinks is brilliant. Washing hands is about keeping oneself clean and separating from things that may contaminate them, being pure, sacred, even slightly aloof and removed. Eruv, on the other hand, means to combine, to blend, to intermingle. By sharing a food, we turn these unrelated apartment owners and individuals into one family, social integration. Usually, they represent two opposing personalities. There are those people who are like washing hands, those who are more concerned with and possess clean hands. They tend to be more pure, deep, authentic individuals. At the same time, they are also more private and insular. They are not the social ones. They neither wish for or have time for the superficialities of the world, and they are more likely to be isolated. The Eruv people, on the other hand, are those who are the classic Geminis, the ones who thrive on conversation, interaction, socialization, finding a way that allows them to come together. They live for connection and alliances. Generally, as mentioned above, they are two distinct individuals, two distinct personalities. Here was Shlomo's wisdom, his brilliance, that as the Talmud tells us, God said, Yismach Libi, my heart shall be glad. But King Solomon in his wisdom was able to, on the one hand, he built the temple, the most holy and spiritual edifice that enabled God to rest among the people, that raised the spiritual profile of each and every Jew. On the other hand, he was a fair and powerful leader that understood the need to successfully interact and build alliances with the other nations. He was an extremely industrious ruler who worked with surrounding empires and turned Israel into a global power, trading with all the other countries. Egypt sent him their famous horses. Arabia sent him exotic spices. The Queen of Sheba came to see what all the talk was about and claimed King Solomon to be even more impressive than the rumors. He was a truly successful world leader. But most importantly, he was a servant of God, a man of morality, wisdom, and spirituality, a true light among the nations, a man with clean hands. And I think there's an important message here. It is about balance. On one hand, we need social interaction. As human beings, we instinctively crave interaction. We are seeing that clearly through this pandemic, that as people have been isolating, mental health issues have soared. Suicide hotlines have increased by 600%, and cases of depression have skyrocketed. We truly require and thirst for interaction. And therein lies the lesson. And as Jews, it is important, even obligatory, to integrate, interact, and ultimately impact the world. But at the same time, we need to remain distinct in certain respects, to keep our identity, our way of life, our values, our focus, our hands clean. It's always a struggle. We have to appreciate the beauty of our heritage, our uniqueness, our responsibilities, and take precautions to preserve it and ourselves, to stay true to our ideals, our values to God, but to do so safely and in a way of darchei noam and darchei shalom, in a pleasant manner. A story that I heard shows incredible impact of this attitude. I recently watched old footage of Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, known as the Rav, who related this story in 1969. He recounted how many years earlier, in the 1940s, he was in Israel on his only visit there and went to a kibbutz, Kibbutz Kinneret. It was a summer day during the 3 weeks, and he was hot and hungry. He was offered a drink and something to eat, but being that it was an entirely secular kibbutz, he was not sure if the food was kosher, so politely he declined the offering. One of the residents told him that in fact he could eat, as despite them all being irreligious, or as we in Chabad say, not observant at the moment, their kitchen and the food contained within was in fact kosher. How so? Rav Soloveitchik asked, intrigued. Let me tell you how it happened, said the man. A number of years ago, Rav Kook, who as some may know was a prominent historical figure, in 1921, he became the first Israeli Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel. Rav Kook was a staunch admirer of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the sixth Rebbe of Chabad, who praised him as a Gaon. And he was in fact an advocate of releasing the Rebbe when he was imprisoned by the Soviets. Anyway, back to the story. Rav Kook came to visit the kibbutz. It was Erev Shabbat, Friday afternoon, and he remained for Shabbat. The entire membership of the kibbutz was, as mentioned, secular and Jewish practice, so the fact that it was heading into Shabbat meant nothing. Friday night came, and no one sat with him as he made Kiddush and ate some challah from his bag. The next, when he arose, he asked if some men could join him for a minyan. They declined, for they were not the slightest bit interested. He said nothing, prayed alone, and then again sat down with his attendant for more Kiddush and challah. And so the day went on. Saturday night, after the conclusion of Shabbat, he noticed that the members of the kibbutz were outside together, singing, dancing, socializing, and relaxing. He went over and sat down with them. He told stories of his childhood and parents and sang with them. Not a word of rebuke, no condescending talk, no preaching, just stories and laughter. The next morning, as he left, he said, Shalom, lehitraot, lechol biachad, soda achat. Goodbye, hope to see you soon, and we'll eat together at one table. The man finished off with these words to Rav Soloveitchik. At that moment, we went into the kitchen, threw out our dishes, and resolved to only have kosher from that point, so that the next time Rav decides to come, we should be able to eat together. Wow. No preaching or quoting of halacha, no musar, no rebuke, just an acceptance of them as individuals as they are and a pure love for everyone and recognition of their potential. And through expressing that love in a way of darchei noam, darchei shalom, pleasantness, and with a calm demeanor, he made the greatest impact. It is all about keeping our values and maintaining our standards while interacting and impacting those around us with love. combining our washing of the hands with social intelligence. We have a similar idea with the menorah, the golden candelabra that was stationed in the Beit HaMikdash, the temple. It was fashioned by Bezalel, the master craftsman, out of a single piece of gold. It was originally in the tabernacle and then later brought to the temple. The center was upright and the branches reached outwards on both sides. We are told that when it was lit, the flames of the branches on either side faced the center, and the center flame, the shamash, faced directly above, up to heaven. There's a strong message here. There are multiple ways that we leaning a little to the left, to the right, all different kinds of Jews and personalities. As we know, 2 Jews, 3 synagogues. But we are all one unit, hewn out of the one gold, the one image of God. And our flames, our source and direction, need to be heavenly focused. This was the vision of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. In addition to the well-known idea of transforming darkness into light, that the only way to effectively fight darkness is through lighting a candle, bringing light, the Rebbe also understood the need for each individual connecting to others on the other's level, while understanding that we are all the same, with common purpose at our core. Like the varying branches of the menorah, each side seemingly facing opposite directions, each one a unique individual with their own distinct talents, personality, views. We're all different, but ultimately we all connect to the shamash, the center flame, the divinity. Husband and I are shluchim in Washington, D.C. One of the more well-known programs of Chabad around the world is the public menorah lighting ceremonies. In D.C., we oversee the annual lighting of the national menorah across from the White House. It is attended in person every year by thousands and televised to tens of millions and over 1,000 TV stations, both here in the US and the world. One of the reasons within Chabad that we emphasize these lightings is because of this underlying message of valuing distinction, yet with the understanding of the core, its central purpose. Like the menorah, we have the eruvin, the mixing, the branching out, the integrating. But at the core, we have the netilat yadayim, the hand washing, the sanctity directs all we do. So how do we do that? How can we develop this appreciation? And how can we connect that to the state the world is in and our subsequent actions as a result of the current coronavirus? By taking a moment to think as we wash our hands. Washing represents purity, separation. Water represents mayim chayim, the waters of Torah, or the waters of godliness, that every one of our actions should be washed with or framed by a greater purpose. At the same time, our actual hands represent our involvement with the world, our actions. We cleanse ourselves by washing our hands of arrogance or self-importance, realizing that everything is from Hashem. It all comes from God, and we have to work for his purpose of building a better world. Washing hands, the intent of creating purity, is not to separate you from the world, but exactly the opposite. First and foremost, we must wash off that layer, that focus on the superficial, the virus of materialism that permeated the world prior to COVID-19. And then to be able to take that spirituality and newfound focus and values and bring that purity to the rest of the world, the Eruvin, all while maintaining a degree of separation. As we return to personal engagement with one another, we will still maintain 6 feet of social distancing, an altruistic spiritual separation, not to get too engrossed in the mundane, a degree of accountability to others and to Hashem, to God. And through that, like in the days of Shlomo, like in the days of King Solomon, using his wisdom and following his example, we will once again, please God, see peace and unity, and a golden era of prosperity will reign with the coming of Mashiach. I will leave you with a thought. When washing our hands, let's always remember whose hands we are in. Thank you for joining.